if you guys can tell us a little bit more about what inspired you to begin Cheeba in the first place, and what is your vision for the cannabis industry and education in the African continent or beyond that.
And to start with what inspired us, as a cannabis, user, it's always been something that has helped me personally in my life. I'm not a heavy user, but it's something that has helped me with perspective, with connectivity with people, essentially I'm also a creative, so it's helped me on a creative level. And I've obviously been super frustrated for a long time in terms of the legal framework or the lack of legal framework and the sort of indoctrination that we've all had to endure for decades and decades, especially when you can see what the plant can do medically, environmentally, etc., etc. So that's kind of the inspiration that drove me. I've been in the music industry most of my life and kind of got to a point where I was kind of exploring other options and other things that I wanted to look at, and cannabis sort of ticked all of those boxes, and I made a decision to try and to use that inspiration to create, but also to educate. I'm a passionate educator. I believe education is the key to especially developing economies, rising up and becoming sort of more powerful, and their citizens advancing. So education and cannabis, I used to be in the music industry, and now I'm into music and education. So took those parallel skills from education in the music industry into the space, and that's kind of what got me started. But I'm deeply passionate about what cannabis and hemp can do for our continent and our people.
Yeah, I guess also for myself, it's like also a personal journey. I mean, I started late in cannabis in terms of understanding its properties and its abilities, and I think it's basically through the journey of watching my parents both die from cancer. So my father died from prostate cancer, my mom died from breast cancer, and I think during that time when we would go to the hospital and when they were receiving their chemo and radiation, there weren't any other alternatives which were offered. And the probability of myself and my younger brother for getting cancer, since both our parents were diagnosed with it, was rather quite high. So then I just started looking and investigating and researching and exploring like what are other alternatives out there that are natural and that they're not invasive as chemo and radiation were for my parents. And then cannabis would pop up, and came about. And I come from a film background, so a lot of the time would be used to educate and empower and upskill people. And I think for me personally, that's been the mission, is to get as many people to understand that there are other alternatives to medical care, especially when around specific and certain cancers, because the research has been out there. And I feel like a lot of the stigma has sort of, prevented people from going deeper and understanding what the probabilities are and what the possibilities are of this plant. And I feel that our input into society, the global world, will basically bring about a new understanding of this potential plant and what it can do for you.
Thanks, Linda, for sharing your story, and thank you, Trenton. These are very two passionate entrepreneurs with very personal stories, and the empathy that you hold towards the plant and the future that it holds. Thanks for sharing. How I see it is, with cannabis education, you are trying to empower people to know more about the plant, its benefits, and move towards cultivating it in better ways than it has been done through the ages, and be able to commercialize that and help in the economic growth of the region. So yeah, that's a great effort by the Academy, using education as a tool to move forward